We're going to be talking about how to manage API development, a subject that's pretty near and dear to my heart because I see it being done both very well and very poorly. And when it's done well, it's really exciting, both as a former engineer and product person. It's so good to see. And then when it's not done well, it makes me a bit sad. I've got Ash here from Google, formerly ran Telstra's, one of Telstra's API monetization programs. And yeah, we're going to get stuck into it. So I'm Scott. I'm the CEO and founder of Terum. Ash, you just want to jump the slide? I'm the CEO and founder of Terum. We are a Fast 100 company 2 years in a row. We're a product development firm. We specialize in helping companies like Qantas, MYOB, and others build, think about their products. I've been involved in 61 major product launches. I'm an amateur sausage maker, have a few other passions like sailing. But really the purpose of these webinars that we've covered a wide range of topics around product and product development is we just love like getting into the chatting with people who've been there, done that, understanding their experiences and their lessons learned. So I've kind of introduced Ash. I'll give a bit more of an intro. So he ran a program at Telstra formerly to really take a whole bunch of their APIs, modernize them, make them more consumable by their customers and other users. And now he's been at Google helping organizations across Australia think about, and APAC, think about how they modernize their APIs, how they think about APIs as product. What I'm going to do is hand over to Ash now. Ash, over to you. You're on mute. Make sure you unmute yourself. Welcome to our webinar series. Really keen to learn about APIs with you today. Please, I'll hand over to you.
Thank you, Scott. And just before I start, I want to make sure that I'm not on mute and you can hear me all right.
Can do. Yeah,
perfect.
All good.
Okay. So thanks for that intro. So I'll just add a few more points to it. Yeah, the full name is Ashish Kumar. I'll keep it short as Ash for now. Working as a customer success engineer in what we now call as a business application platforms team within Google Cloud. In my past life, I have been a software engineer and an API product manager, and I've actually seen quite a few both large and small sort of API programs increase in size. So to guide the conversation that we're going to have today, right? So there are a few points that I've just sort of laid down. We're going to talk about something called digital value chain and the API consumer or API customers. This is very important, both to kind of come on to the same sort of understanding in terms of terminology, the actors involved in the entire chain, and really focus or rather direct this conversation to API developers as well as app developers who become the consumers of APIs. We'll also touch upon, how do you build a culture for success around, what are the tools and methodologies you need to both start and build a successful API program. Some of the best practices, and then Scott and I will kind of discuss throughout this conversation, we'll discuss some of the examples from the industry that both of us have seen time and again. So let me just start with this concept of digital value chain, right? So the fundamental goal of a digital value chain is essentially to identify your target audience and its needs. So let me explain. When we are moving from right to left in this digital value chain, a lot of us have seen or have worked at different point of times some sort of a backend service. Either that's a database, a web service that we wanted to expose some interface from, using a team of developers, whether that's an API team or a web services team, or back in the day RPC or Corba and different kind of interfaces. Eventually creating some kind of an interface for a large community of developers to consume, who are eventually working on an app or an experience to be delivered to an end customer. And that's the right to left approach is something that I think has worked fairly well, especially when some of these technologies were fairly new, and we were just trying to figure out as to how do we expose whatever capability that we have. And that space has matured fairly well in last 10 years. So where we've started kind of seeing the market move is there is a lot more clarity in terms of what is being expected from any sort of a digital experience these days, all the way, from the leftmost entity in this chain is the end customer who's using the applications to get the experience that they want to get. And as API team developers or interface developers or members, the customer that we are building our services for is the person who's kind of pretty much sitting right in there is the experience developer or the app developer. Now, app developers actually, if you take a closer look at that, they would fall into multiple different categories, right? So you've got application developers who are within your own teams, within adjacent teams to where you are sitting. There are also developers across the organization in a different line of business or business unit. And then you'd be working with, a number of partners on any given day. Eventually opening up the entire experience to the entire group of long-tail developers. Essentially, anyone and everyone can use your products and build more experiences on top of that. So the sort of line between the internal developer and the external developer is sort of fading away. Developers are developers. They've got fairly similar needs irrespective of where they are sitting. And they really want to get to building the apps and experiences that they want to get to fairly quickly.
Ash, just on that one, do you see a lot of organizations thinking about it in that way now? And do they have to prioritize like, oh, this is going to be externally consumed from the beginning, or okay, because we always talk about like you should have a persona or who you're kind of targeting in mind. Is it one to just say, well, they're all the same, or do you find organizations starting with internal and then rolling out to external, or is it better to always have the external in mind?
This is a really good question, Scott. So a couple of years back, we did see a very clear separation between internal and external, to the point wherein some of the organizations had very different sort of catalogs which were exposed to different developers. Now, with the right use of technology and sort of implementation of proper role-based access controls, we are seeing a shift in the market now, wherein a developer is a developer, and it's not just an internal and external, it's essentially a role that is defined for the developer. A certain developer has access to a certain set of services or a service catalog. And that has started to emerge, especially because the amount of effort required is not very, very different in both to define both the postures.
Yeah, because it almost seems easier to think about the extent, like, as in you're almost going to get a better result with similar effort if you just think about, because often it's just about thinking about the external developer, and it even makes your internal, even if you never expose it, it just makes your internal API even better.
Absolutely. And also, when we start to look at internal developers, right, just that as a group, then there are more kind of subcategories that start to emerge there, right? There are developers within your team, within your line of business, within your BU, and rest of the organization. So it's not just internal versus external. It's actually quite a large group of categorization that you can make. So
And it's almost like, it's in a way what I've definitely seen is internal developers that are not in your immediate team are almost effectively external developers because
yes,
like they they need the same level of documentation. You got to
yeah,
think about them properly, and because they may never speak to you and they need to use the service, and yeah.
absolutely right. So, and we've seen some really good examples where the entire design process and then thinking behind how do we create the experience for developers is purely based on external developers, which means that there are proper documentation in place. There is self-service mechanism to be able to get access to services, and that sort of posture not only makes your external developers' life easy, it just makes it very, very easy for internal developers to get access to what they need.
Yeah. That's awesome.
Yeah. So, so what the point that I'm trying to kind of highlight on this slide is that understand who your cousin consumer is, right? So it's not just folks sitting next to you. It's a very, very large community of developers who you may not get a chance to interact, face to face ever with. It might be through just documentation, online communities, forums, if you've got access to those sort of, or sort of online channels on Slack and Teams and whatnot.
Yeah.
Uh, so companies do have a focused API strategy and an advanced API strategy will always look to engage developers without creating such a simple differentiation. Their differentiation mostly lies on role-based access controls. Okay, so what we also see with this kind of an approach wherein you start to treat different developers start slightly differently, right? So there'll always be some developers. I've been an app developer myself, and I've whinged about the documentation not being proper so many times, right? And I'm talking about APIs that are exposed directly out of stuff like JVMs and whatnot.
This is like basically daily occurrence in the life of any engineer working in a company of more than 5 people, right?
Absolutely. So the documentation does not match what's happening. There are version mismatches. Uh, it does not behave exactly the way it's supposed to. And sometimes you just can't simply figure out how an API works. We've all seen that. Just the time to first hello world is days, if not hours. Uh, so these are fairly common occurrences, and uh, where where we see what sort of creates these sort of occurrences is again that sort of an approach fundamentally which uh, relies on my backend does XYZ. So let me try and expose what this database does or what a certain service does, and let me package that up in some sort of an interface. Let's call it an API product in this case, and expose it to the rest of the world.
And it's almost always done in like a what's easiest from it's like done from the systems point of view, like what's easiest from the data set, the data structure that we have, or what's easiest from the communication protocols that we have available. Oh, FTP is easy.
Absolutely.
Let's just do file transfer, or like, oh, we've got heaps of data, so it's really hard to figure out how to do an API, so we'll just dump it into a file store somewhere for our consumers to consume. Like, yeah, it's super interesting.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. So, and there's another way. If you look at it from a product packaging point of view, it's sometimes easier to package the capability that you have than to try and focus on the capability that you can create with what you have in terms of.
Yeah.
Uh,
The effort factor is really high, like or perceived to be high. Yeah.
But what has happened over a period of time, the capabilities have just increased ridiculously. There are a large number of backends available. There are more than, there's a large number of vendors, there are a large number of products. Sometimes a single vendor has more than one product that does exactly the same thing. So the capability that you've packaged has grown so big, so it's just very difficult to find out what you need to get your job done, and then understand how it will do what it needs to do, right? So that time to first hello world is still very high. So that's one fundamental thing that we've tried to approach slightly differently, right? So customers are quite tech savvy these days. They are quite used to using digital experiences. And with the amazing amount of work that companies like Google, Amazon, and Apple have done, they've gotten into this kind of a habit wherein they want something now. Like I'm kind of equally guilty of that. Like if I want to order a product, I want it delivered within an hour, right? So that kind of demand is very difficult to keep up with unless you actually really focus on that demand.
And it flows through to like, as a developer, it flows through to my same approach to consuming an API. Like I don't want to spend a week. Why didn't it work in 3 minutes? Why do I have to spend a week figuring it out?
Absolutely. Like you might have heard this sort of conversation between an API product manager who's coming from some sort of a technical background saying to a developer, oh, this only takes this much time. Why will it take for it to get into production in 6 weeks from now and stuff like that? So that's one aspect of it. But there's another interesting thing to notice here is that some of these backends are still quite legacy platforms. In terms of CRM, like
Not having an API, yeah, like and not having an API, or we work with some systems that are probably like they got tens of $1 million price tag on them, but the API doesn't function as defined, or they're super difficult to interact with for some reason. They're very old school.
Absolutely right, and if you are part of a large organization, you would also know that there is not just one backend system. Like you're probably still dealing with, if not more, at least 2 CRM platforms, right? So, so there is also where do I route this specific request? What are the rules and logics for it? So that sort of confusion is not very simple to extract from the existing interfaces that are available.
And the thing that I personally love about this Google approach to API development, the outside in, treat it as a product, is that it kind of breaks down all that the complications on the back end, saying no, the important thing is the customer and the product we're delivering to them and their expectations, and then the rest is almost just technical, figure it out. Like it's not rocket surgery. It's just the hard bit is what's the actual experience or product we need to deliver to who, right?
Yeah. So in our kind of, when we engage with customers, we like to sort of state this thing called 5-5-5 approach, which basically means 5 seconds to do service discovery, 5 minutes to understand what that does, and 5 days to take it to production after integrating into your application. And we've built some sort of tools and methodologies to make that happen.
Is that because of people's like, that's their experience, that's how they want to experience consuming an API? Is that it's kind of driven from that this thing we're talking about, wanting it to work soon and fast, and
yeah, and more also because a lot of organizations are these days running weekly sprints.
Yeah.
So you understand something in this sprint and you try to deliver it in the next one. So that's from a day-to-day working point of view.
Yeah.
So let's see. I'm just being honest. I'm also kind of just looking at my notes on the screen. So
yeah, that's all right.
So yeah, let's just continue moving on. I just wanted to kind of pause here and see if anyone had any question, or Scott, if you want to talk about the fundamental difference between an outside-in approach and an inside-out approach.
Yeah, you know what I'd love, like we were talking earlier about your experience at Telstra and the stark difference between when you shifted from inside-out approach to outside in. I'd love to hear a bit of what that change was like and the benefit it brought.
Yeah, sure. I can actually talk about a very specific example. Uh, when we started as at that point of time, we used to call it the external API program in Telstra. Telstra being a telco, one of the first APIs that we had to get out was the messaging API, right? And the intent was there was a large number of internal applications that wanted to use two-factor authentication. And instead of spending a chunk of money in buying that sort of service from somewhere else, we decided to build our own. And a two-factor authentication is a very simple, straightforward A2P, where an application sends a message to a person through SMS. And we designed our product roadmap based on that thinking and built an alpha product, took the alpha product to market. We were lucky enough to be able to run a hackathon on it. And within about 90 minutes to 2 hours of running that hackathon, we realized that we'd made a very big mistake in not considering a person to application approach in the messaging API, which means a person should be able to either respond to an incoming SMS or invoke an interaction with an application by sending an SMS. We did a fairly quick calculation and identified that was almost 50% of the market that we were not addressing by not implementing that feature.
Yeah, wow. And that's probably because you went about it from hey, here's the requirement that from internally, it's like, here's what our systems need to do. But then no one, I guess because it was a while ago now, before a lot of the modern thinking to APIs was out, it's like no one thought to go and actually ask someone who was on the receiving end of a message, like, hey, how do you want to experience this thing?
Yeah. There were two things there, right? So that was very simple to do. It was probably the first thing that sort of comes to your mind.
Yeah.
But also, like, a similar sort of service has been in market for a while. So the extended developer community, or what we call as external developers, they've used those sort of services from companies like Whisper, Twilio. There's a lot of examples of that.
Yeah.
And they also identified the gaps that they were seeing in the solution. They wanted to build use cases where an applications are receiving messages from individuals.
Yeah.
There was one person who'd built within our hackathon, who'd actually, because within the hackathon time, we were able to make this code change fairly quickly and allow it.
Yeah.
That person had actually built something called wherein an administrator would be able to schedule an ambulance run based on an SMS that someone has sent who had proper using mobile authentication.
Yeah.
There was another team that actually implemented by sending an SMS, they could trigger Windows system upgrade on a large number of PCs.
Yeah.
I remember these cases because these are some of the folks who actually won the award for the hackathon. So
yeah. This is so like my kind of takeaway just before moving on with the rest of the presentation. My takeaway there is you guys probably spent a lot of time like planning and designing the system, and like really the takeaway there is the sooner you're saying you're lucky you had the hackathon. It's like the sooner you can get your consumers involved, your developers, your end developers involved in your API design, the better. Like you kind of want to have them sitting there as a consumer from day one, right? Like in your early meetings when you're thinking about it, it sounds like.
That's a really good point, Scott. And I'd actually just quote one of our customers is a company, ABN AMRO Bank. In Europe, their developer portal won quite a number of awards, and they actually run this entire process through their dev portal, wherein folks come in, mostly API product owners and product managers, they come in and just document an idea, and take that idea all the way up to production or discard it based on, how the community is engaging with it.
Community feedback. Yeah, so like they'll have an idea and they put it straight up. They don't go start building or just, like, is it technically going to work? They put it up. Hey, is this what you want, everyone? That's awesome. Yeah, that's really interesting to hear.
Yeah, so the process goes from idea to an interface. And once an interface is in some decent shape, that's when you start sort of building any sort of capability around it.
Yeah. It's actually cheaper as well.
Yeah.
Like, yeah. You don't have any rewrites. You can wait, see if it's any good. You know where to focus. Yeah, it's awesome.
Yeah, and the time to market is significantly reduced with this.
Yeah. I'll let you keep going.
Sounds good. So what we've learned is developer engagement is the key, right? So, and it's not just the API program, right? Because the APIs will eventually expose quite a large set of capabilities within the organization, right? Sometimes it will be the way you run your business, right? Google Maps is a great example because the entire business is run through APIs. What you and I have on our phone is a free app, but the way that business runs is all through APIs. So folks who use these APIs will define how successful that specific business is, right? So, and the folks who use these APIs are the developers. So their engagement is the key in terms of them getting early access to programs, providing the feedback, and just getting what they need to get their job done. What we've also seen is for you as an API development team, when you've understood that your audience and that your market is app developers, you need to start treating your APIs as products. Like, don't write code that will be stale one day. There has to be an owner for it, because there's a good chance that there's a large number of developers consuming that. Understand how much can you support through an interface or an API. So those are some of the things that we'll probably touch upon as we kind of go through this, but
yeah,
just sort of interesting to look at. What we will also advocate is create developer enablement, right? So, which means build tools and resources so that developers are not only just able to get access to the API, understand the documentation, but also get anything else that they need. If it's a developer who's paying for a service through the API, they would want to know what is their consumption pattern. If it's a company who's bought an API and wanting to understand how they're consuming that, which of their teams are using it, provide those sort of analytics to your developers, probably from day one. What we've also seen in the market is that the APIs itself are, not just no longer just mechanisms of accessing a certain piece of information. They're like agents of digital transformation, right? I go back to the same example, like who would have thought someone will use sending an SMS to upgrade, a large set of Windows computers.
Yeah.
An API involved in that process. So it's essentially a basically new way of working that a certain set of individuals have created.
Yeah.
Right? Probably because they were lazy, they didn't want to get to their computer, just use their phone to kick things off.
Yeah.
But you know where I'm going with this, right? So in similar cases, sorry, go on.
Oh, no, and it's like if you start thinking of it as an agent of change or a product, really, as soon as you start thinking like that, it completely upgrades the benefits of what they're doing as well. So it's like, there it is as a product, it is helping someone upgrade all their computers or deal with an ambulance service better. And if you kind of lean into that, then you can just see all of a sudden you're delivering more value versus just pushing out a bunch of code and pushing data around. Like, it's suddenly got real tangible value. If you describe it as an upgrade service, rapid upgrade services. Yeah, it's not SMS anymore, is it? It's quite a powerful thing.
Absolutely, right. So, and when you say completely change, another way of saying is transformed, right? So,
Yeah,
uh, so I'm not kind of diluting the value of what's on the left hand side of the slide deck. Like APIs are still a great mechanism to create an access, even system to system access. At the same time, they're a great mechanism to integrate, especially using cloud-based services,
yeah,
right? Uh, they APIs have powered and are continuing power experiences, right? Where like you cannot imagine writing a mobile app these days without having access to RESTful services or APIs, right? All of that has been enabled by a large community of developers. Uh, the point that I'm trying to make is now it's time to take that conversation to really transform the way things are really working. People do their business, uh, by getting involved or participating into these ecosystems and thinking of everything as a platform where both producers and consumers are able to interact fairly closely to get to a certain outcome. So I'll just pause here, see if anyone has a question, or I'll just otherwise continue. Cool. Okay. So now if you are thinking of APIs as products, there will be a need to create some product strategy, right? So, and when we look at APIs as products, what we've seen some of the organizations very successfully do is to be able to create a differentiation between those transformational style API products and the domain APIs or APIs that behave as system connectors, right?
you
Because
could almost call the domain ones almost like integration layer. Is it another way?
mostly, right? So it's essentially managing your east-west traffic or creating uh, kind of connections between the systems that you or your partners or your suppliers own, right? Uh, Typically, your experience APIs would result in, one or more invocation of domain APIs. For example, you would use one domain API for authentication, another one to get access to customer information from a CRM or validate customer information from a CRM, and then eventually go to a resource server to execute the actual resource that needs to be executed.
Yeah,
Right? Whereas your experience APIs would be, you know, uh, I can take again Google Maps as a great example there, uh, wherein you want to know what is my current location, or integration between Uber and Google Maps is I want to go from here to here in a car of a certain style. Get me that. Okay, so what we see as uh, you know, uh, another way of looking at our digital value chain, there will always be external forces creating a certain amount of demand from the set of services that you're exposing. And there will always be internal forces defining how uh, these services are being exposed. I'm talking really high level here, right? So think of CEOs sitting on the left-hand side here and CIOs or CTOs sitting on the right-hand side, right? So there are very different concerns that both parts of the organization have, right? CEOs are the ones who are probably going to focus, or the product managers, the business side of the organization, they're going to focus on this is what the market is demanding in a digital economy. The right hand side of the organization think, how do I control, how do I secure this access, how do I enable mutual TLS, how do I create reusability of the services that I've already created and whatnot. And like I said earlier, we still have the need to continue to go faster and make sure we do not give up on any important controls that are in place. So very quickly, let's just apply sort of, for lack of a better term, let's just call it Google's culture playbook to an API strategy, right? So let me just talk about Google's culture from the point of view that there are 9 products that sort of Google manages, which has over 1 billion users each, right? So, and on the left-hand side, there are about 6 points that we kind of focus on quite a bit. 10x or a moonshot thinking is a pretty big focus. We always think in terms of next billion users. The internal organization culture is very focused on transparency, which essentially means there's no differentiation that we like to create between internal developers and external developers. Quite a large number of APIs, pretty much all the APIs that we have exposed are available to everyone. Employees are empowered. Again, like I said, we don't have to be on a corporate line to access anything. We can work from pretty much anywhere, and that really creates a sort of an empowerment, which improves productivity significantly. Okay, ideas come from everywhere. I think I've spoken about that Telstra example which is a fantastic example of this. And Google pretty much runs this way, has been running this way ever since it started. There's a heavy use of data, not opinions. I'll go back to my point there. It was not the fact that a bunch of users were using P2A in that example that I spoke. It was the fact that about 50% of the users were demanding that feature that changed the product roadmap direction. And most important, focus on the user, not the competition. And what we recommend, right? So lead with business value and outside-in thinking. Create an engagement model which spans across internal partner and external developers. Make sure you've got a very workable governance in place. Think of governance as you are creating governance or controls for enablement, or center for enablement rather, with proper automation in place, with ease of consumption, findability and usability. If you look at it from a technical point of view, products like Istio are basically talking exactly the same, like service discovery, usability, deployment, management becomes fairly easy. And lastly, and the most important one, is measure and define your success measures for your programs.
And just before jumping into the next bit, say you're an organization, maybe like where Telstra was when it was a bit internal looking, or a lot of organizations that I've seen worked with, they've kind of, the APIs have grown up organically, and there's like repetition, and there's some APIs sitting over here, there's some over here, and then all of a sudden, people are pushing them to be able to consume those APIs, and they're kind of a bit stuck because there's this bit of like, well, don't we already have the APIs? Well, yeah, we do, but they're not really ready because no one can really use them or understand them without a lot of effort. I guess I see that situation a lot, and there's a bit of like, I guess, hesitation to invest more in the APIs because it's kind of like, well, aren't they already there and usable? And I guess this might end up being a bit more of a statement, but I'm really curious about your thoughts on it, because what I love about these 5 points, the way you put it, is that leading with the business value and outside in is probably the best way to start to create the conversation around, well, hey, actually, how do we, like, people aren't getting the benefit from it, or I'm just really curious to have that discussion with you about how do you get an organization from all these APIs everywhere that are being built by IT or the engineers, and then all of a sudden you got to expose them. How do you get between those 2 points? Because they're actually a long way away, and it often involves special funding. Like, you've got to fund a team to do it. You got to fund a product manager. I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Absolutely. So reusability versus federation, right? So that's probably one of the most difficult topics to deal with. Now, fundamentally, what blocks it or what impacts it the most is the way organizations are structured, right? So uh, in some of the large organizations, we are seeing there are core IT groups, then there are shadow IT groups, then there's a digital organization, all of them building sort of an API. And I'll touch upon this when I talk about the automate governance aspect. Uh, some of the things that have worked for some of the organization, but that's an area that sort of needs continuous executive involvement and buy-in for it to succeed. Does that sort of answer your question to some level? That I'll answer it later, Scott?
Yeah,
Or...
yeah, it does. It does. I mean, what I kind of take from your answer is like the key bit is if you really want APIs to deliver value, you need executive buy-in at the right level who can kind of bring that consistency across everything. Otherwise, you're always going to end up with fragmentation.
Yeah.
That's one takeaway I got from what you said.
Yeah. So that if you do not have the exec support, then there's a good chance that you would have done something really good, but the adoption is not there. And then, multiple teams are kind of doing the exact same thing. So all of those things are, from a technical point of view, is somewhat easier to solve, but from an organizational structure point of view, really needs exec support to drive it. Towards reusability. Okay. So let's look at the first one in a little bit more detail. Lead with business values, right? So if you've read anything about lean development, essentially just do what is required sort of scenario. Focus on customer needs and that much alone. There's absolutely a need. Don't shy away from creating personas, but not as internal developers, external developers, but kind of use different sort of categorization for it. In terms of there are going to be app developers who will be using your APIs in slightly different mechanisms. It could be just volume based, or there could be, how engaged they are, how many changes they're asking for, something like this, the kind of apps they're developing. There's a chance that someone's creating a voice conversation based interface, working on the front end. So those are some of the important points to consider when you look at, your customers' needs and goals, and also understand their pain points, right? So those are the way, that's how you go about creating personas, right? So internal and external is probably not the best way to start with it.
Yeah.
And use that data to drive your own prioritization, right? So,
and I would think of jobs to be done would be a really good tool to use here. Like jobs to be done is a great way to define the job that someone's trying to do, and then in that captures the value. And
absolutely. I actually finished my Dr. Clayton's course, who kind of came up with that idea of jobs to be done just about a month back.
So, cool.
So
all fresh. Yeah.
So yes, use jobs to be done framework, right? It's quite useful both at a really large organizational structure level, but at the same time as a product owner, even if you're a software developer, your API is your product, it'll guide the direction and the life cycle of that API.
Cool.
Right. So
we've got about like 5-10 minutes left as well. I just want to remind you.
Okay. I have about 4 slides to go. So
yeah, awesome.
Okay, so I think I'm going to publish this in somewhere. There's some of this content is also on YouTube, but create an API engagement model. So the way to look at this slide is whatever you have in between, think of it as a platform where both your producers and consumers are engaging. They are both contributing into the platform. Even consumers are contributing in terms of what they need from the platform, the feedback that they're providing. What are their needs and pain points? And your producers are surfacing that. And if you look at the absolutely right side of this, and that has been highlighted fairly clearly, is you need executive support for this function to both be built and run successfully.
Hey, Ash, just on that one, who would you say, is the best? So I'm working in probably two runs, like I'm working in a tech company, big tech company, or I'm working in uh, government, or boy, is another one, there's three now, or I'm working in a large like enterprise. Who's the best executive in your view to get on? Like, is it the CEO? Is it the head of product, like the chief product officer? Is it the CTO? Yeah, super curious.
Uh, it's an interesting question. I don't have a great answer to this question. I can give you some data points though.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
we've got uh, we've got CIOs, uh, chief digital officers, and where you would also need proper executive support in some cases who have been the executive is CMOs. If your
yeah.
product
Interesting.
management, if your product management function sits under CMO,
Yeah,
then British Telecom, like EE was an organization acquired by British Telecom, and EE, with the entire API program, which is about 200 million pounds a year. That's the
yeah.
revenue it generates. There, the program was funded by the CMO.
And it kind of struck like, is it? This might be too much, but is one better than the other? Like, if you could pick CMO or CIO,
I think what is I think what I
which
would say is
engineers
that
have the most fun?
C is the most important letter there,
Very diplomatic. Yeah.
right? So like you need to get support from that level of an executive
Yeah.
or a direct report.
Yeah. Yeah. Awesome. Sorry, I'll let you keep going.
Yeah, let's move on to the next one is automate governance in your kind of center for enablement. So first of all, it's a center for enablement, not a community of practice. Do not, like some organizations have gone ahead and built these API practice teams, and they actually function as gateways for you need to do this before this API can be.
Yeah, 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 yeah.
That's a blocker. That's a, you are creating a bottleneck.
And because what you're saying with center for enablement, what I take from that, or what's implied for me at least when I see this, is it's a funded team.
It's a funded team.
It's a cost, it's like it's a genuine cost center that's
Yes.
fully funded, has a budget, has a bunch of people, has capability, like it can buy technology, all that kind of
Absolutely.
stuff.
And has very well defined KPIs, most importantly,
Yeah.
that their job is to enable. They'll build code like building a CI/CD pipeline or API virtualization capability to be able to test and whatnot.
Yeah, yeah, awesome.
It is also providing developers things that you can see on the right hand side for them to continue, debug better, get more access to more information.
Yeah.
Okay, so you make sure you've created ease of API consumption, right? Any developer is able to find an API fairly quickly, build search capabilities in there, right? So Google Cloud APIs is a great example to look at. The documentation is very clear, right? So again, I'll go back to that 555 example. Provide step-by-step tutorials, because authentication authorization ends up becoming a bottleneck. Solve that problem, create the spectrum, and lock it down. I'm going through this one fairly quickly, but because I think we've spoken about this a little bit.
Yeah, yeah.
In the presentation, and look, this is probably the most important one. Define your success metrics, measure them, and ensure, like, irrespective of whether you're a product manager or you're a resource manager, that you are going up and asking for the right kind of funding from the organization. Like funding for C4E, if you're a resource manager within the IT organization or under a CIO, or if you're a product manager, think of getting your funding for a platform, not just for an individual project.
This is a really useful slide for anyone that's sitting there right now listening to this, thinking, how am I going to build the business case for my API? You've kind of given them the key, like, here's the things to use to get the budget sorted out.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
And if you kind of look at the slide, there's also talks about some high-level examples of kind of APIs you want to deliver. Don't have an API of building 400, 500 APIs. That's not a good KPI, right? How many application errors are you able to reduce? End user application errors are you able to reduce? Is a good KPI to have, right? So that's going to be, it's going to take some time to really understand your strategy, define the right KPIs, and
Yeah.
then everything else becomes fairly easy based on that.
And what is the number one thing that you've seen, or what are the like best cases? Which ones generally help people get their API strategy idea funded? Are there any that stand out?
So I think ones that we've seen in a lot of organization is that uh, uh, the NPS improvement for their mobile apps. Typically, what we see is that there is uh, either a high error rate and an inconsistent experience across online and mobile channels. So a consolidation of that
Yeah.
is essentially because, over the last 4 or 5 years, getting funding for anything that's more mobile first has been easy in a lot of organizations.
Yeah.
So improving customer experience through mobile apps is an area that has worked fairly well.
Yeah. Okay.
Uh, when the program matures, then people start looking into net new revenues. That was our goal at Telstra. I think that program is close to about a 15 million a year revenue at this point of time.
Yeah. Okay. Okay. Okay.
And I think this is probably the last one, build the right team. So I think I've tried to capture as many roles as are important for running a successful programs on this slide. So I'm not going to go and talk about each one of them, but this is what you basically need to have your center for enablement at the same time have at least one API squad kind of delivering some core capabilities.
Yeah. Yeah. How how's like how essential is product manager, product owner for an API team? Like, can you get it going? Because I see a lot of API teams without one on it. I personally think it's a bit of a trap because you get you need that like they're basically meant to be the voice of the customer. So I'm curious.
You've actually said the right thing. It's voice of the customer, right? So it's not so much as you put a person whose 100% role is to be an API product owner. That's a function that needs to be serviced, whether it's serviced by your existing team members,
Yeah.
or you actually put in a person with a specific head. So let's say you've got a revenue generating API, you need an API product manager for sure.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
If you're a bank in this day and age, you need an API product manager for sure, because the responsibilities will be a lot, with
Yeah.
API being your delivery vehicle
And
for
it
what
sounds
you're
like
delivering to your customers.
if you're say an internally focused API, then maybe what you can do is invite one of your end consumer developers to come and be part of, like, just come and be the voice of the customer. Come to our stand-ups, maybe come to our backlog grooming session. Just be our voice of the customer. Like, tell us that we're doing the wrong thing. Might be a way to fix it. And I mean, you're getting direct feedback from your actual customer, right?
Yeah, think of a product owner as an instance of that platform, right? So what a voice of the customer, absolutely yes, but there's also these exposure side things that are somewhat important right now. If an API can only serve 400 transactions per second at any given point of time, and the demand is increasing, right? And you've created self-serve capability.
Yeah.
You do not want to tip over your backends. Product owner will keep an eye on that, that if someone's asking for more access to this API, give me your capacity requirements, so that if there's a capacity augmentation that needs to be done for the backend, it is done. Someone who can manage the life cycle of the service or the value that's being delivered through the API.
Yeah, so you're not letting people down. Yeah. Cool.
And yeah, so this is, again, I'm just repeating what I already said. Think about these things and make sure you've got the right team in place to deliver these outcomes.
Yeah, awesome. We're
And it's a,
gonna
sorry, go on.
might just jump us into Q&A, conscious of time.
Yeah,
So we've got one here from Cliff, which Cliff has said, question here, for monetization, how would you market an API product to the external world, and how do you measure willingness to pay? I might have a crack at that one, Ash, because that's one of my favorite pet topics.
definitely.
Uh, so, Cliff, I think it's similar to any other product. You really want to go out, start your customer development. Think Steve Blank lean startup style, and I mean, make a mock-up of your API, put up a website, a fake developer portal or something, put your website up there and go out, get a slide deck together, think about the job to be done that you're solving for someone, and try and get them to sign up to be a paying customer for your API. That's probably the best way to do it. I mean, there's a lot more on like how to do that research, but at a simple level, go out there, put a price tag on it, and just ask them, hey, you're gonna sign up, and you if they say yes, you got the price right. If they say it's too high, you might want to bring it down, or you may not have nailed the problem. That'd be my 2 cents on that one. There's one here from David Jones that says, I think it's about pricing rates or rate limiting per hour and day. Ash, you could probably answer this one. What not pricing? All right, so it's rate limiting and throttling.
Yeah, so I go back to that thing. APIs products, a single API proxy can be packaged as different sort of API products. Think of them as gold, silver, bronze, each with a different sort of quota and a rate limit associated to it. And that's a pretty simple thing, that's a pretty sort of a common sort of a capability that most products will do. Apigee for sure does it. And it's a fairly straightforward mechanism to do that from a purely technical point of view.
Just,
Yeah.
keep going, Ash. Keep going.
Yeah. The only thing I was going to say is that if this question is more from what is the market is looking for, I'd go back to Scott, what you said, just ask them. Use your dev portal to ask them if that's all. Yeah.
Like look outside in it. I guess what he's saying is depends on the use case, depends on the job they're trying to get done.
Yeah.
Because there's no general rule. But you're saying like you haven't really seen any general rules around rate limiting things per day, like.
I can talk about a real world example. If you go to Telstra's dev portal, the second API that we built is something called Telstra Event Detection API, which essentially gives information out around SIM swap, right? So there are pretty strict rules on how you get access to it. And that was a brand new thing. First of all, we had no idea how to price it. Absolutely no idea, right? Second, we had no idea what sort of volumes we are going to see or how do we productize it. So there's a very simple thing. We knew the exact audience. In this case, it was going to be the banks. We went to them, we asked them, and then we created a draft pricing proposal, a draft product for it, published it, went back after we started getting feedback from the market, created another version of the product and pricing, and then just kept on iterating.
Yeah. And I think I just it looks like it's around. There's a bit more to this one around people just wanting to do batch jobs versus real time, which I think might be. Are there any things emerging around like is batching still the cool thing to do, or is there a bit of best practice you can go back? David could go back to his customers and say, "Hey, batching's not best practice anymore. Actually, you should be doing things in real time. That's better practice." Do you have any thinking about that at Google?
Look, there are use cases that require batch processing. And I think there will continue to be use cases that will require batch processing.
Yeah.
Where we see the marriage between APIs and batch processing is that when a batch process needs to trigger an event, that's when you invoke an API. If it does not need to invoke an event, if it's a file-based access, then you're better off using that sort of a technology. It's not API management and APIs is definitely not an answer to every technical problem out there or business problem out there. So use the technology that's best suited for that sort of a problem.
Yeah.
Again, goes back to outside in, understand what's required and respond to it.
Yeah, okay. We got time for one more question. I'll just wait a second, see if anyone's got one more question. Otherwise, we're a bit past 4, so I'm gonna get ready to say thank you to Ash. But I'm gonna start saying thank you because that usually triggers a question. But we'll see how we go. Whoa, looks like I've been. What has just happened?
Uh, Scott, there's a question on the screen. Shall I respond to it?
Yeah, yes, go for it. My computer froze.
Okay. So Alistair's asking, how would you evaluate charging for APIs to some third parties and making them free to others based on various dynamics? How do you think about APIs that are okay? So let me just quickly talk about it, right? So whenever you are, if you are thinking of building any kind of a production API, think about a sandbox strategy, right? So me as a developer, I want access to an API proxy, whether that's virtualized or connected to a different data source. That means I'm able to get access to some environment for some API proxy or some API product so that I can start my app development right away, right? Now, that free access to it may mean that I've connected to a test instance. It may mean that I've got access to a very limited amount of value. For example, we had 1,000 SMS APIs per month that we allowed for free. But the intent for that was to make sure developers are able to complete their development activity. That was our market in our world. Uh, Based on your use case, if you see any of these technologies working for you, absolutely go for it, right? So, but sandbox in general, what I've seen works in at least about more than 90% of the cases. Unblock the developer is the golden rule there. I'll go to the next one from.
Well, I might just
Yep,
I've managed to
go for it.
so I'll just a quick one. I'll just jump in. And just in case Alice is coming at it from, how's he thinking about different pricing to different parties, and whether that, like, because I can see, how do you measure an API that someone's query, like how do you charge for an API where someone's querying it all the time versus one where maybe you're pushing notifications to them.
Yeah.
And I think it probably comes back to what we've been saying repeatedly, is that, and this is what I love about Google's approach to APIs, the outside in, what's the job they're trying to do, which then gives you an indication of what's the pain you're solving or the revenue you're getting them, which then lets you do willingness to pay and all that kind of thing. As well as, of course, taking in business dynamics of whether you're trying to win market share or I don't know. Hopefully that helps with that answer. And then we'll just grab this last answer, the last question from Apasana, and then we'll have to say goodbye for today. Ash, I'll let you take that last one.
Sure. Okay. So Pasna is asking, want to know the skill set of an API architect going from an API developer? This is a really, really good question, right? So when we are talking about API developers, right, you're essentially thinking software engineering and software development, that you've got an environment under which you have to go and develop a certain and to a certain requirements. When we are talking any sort of an architectural role, you then have to start thinking about your deployment strategies. How do you deploy? Is it a cloud deployment, a hybrid deployment? Is it, a purely SaaS invocation? And how would you connect your clients to your API management solution, which is then connected to your backends? So you would also need to understand the security implications, security protocols. Uh, you would also need to ensure all the non-functional requirements that you typically see. Is that, how do I make sure that my system continues to operate at, let's say, 10,000 transactions per second? How do I manage genuine spikes in business API invocations? So there's a lot more aspects which kind of sits outside of just building the code and the modules that you would need to consider. And the answer could be, again, you probably won't be able to solve all of them in the way you write code, but you might be able to solve them in the way you deploy the end-to-end platform.
Cool. Thanks, Ash. Thank you everyone for joining us.
Thank you, Scott.
Hope you all learned something. Thank you again so much, Ash. That was awesome. Speak to you all on our next webinar. Thanks so much.
Bye-bye.